Greetings, Helldivers. Today I want to talk about balance again. Last video, we explored the topic of balance around assault rifles and how to make them more relevant and purposeful in the game, as well as looking at some ideas for new assault rifles too. This time, I'm going to give some of the unloved, underused, or underpowered stratagems a good look at, exploring how Arrowhead might make them either more competitive or better define its purpose for existing in the game. The main reason why I'm doing this is because I'm getting pretty tired of the same rotation of stratagem choices we normally use. At the highest level, a good handful of stratagems are simply not worth taking because they don't bring enough value or don't have a strong enough purpose to justify taking up a slot. If your argument is to not bring the strong stuff and use other stuff instead, I'm already doing that. But there's a limit to how much you can challenge your loadout before it stops being fun and borders more on being frustrating. But what compelled me to make this video the most was the fact that the loadout staleness creeping up on the game can be solved not just by adding new content into the game, but by making existing content relevant and competitive to use as well. The best example of this was when the damage over time bug was finally fixed. Suddenly, the gas strike, napalm strike, breaker incendiary, and the flamethrower saw an uptick in usage in non-solo games. Existing content was made relevant, nothing new was added, but it refreshed my enjoyment of the game. With that in mind, I want to try and propose some balance changes to get players excited about the existing stuff. This video will be split into two sections. The first part is going to be looking at stratagems that really could use some love because they just don't see any play, or the value they bring to the table just isn't enough to be worth it. The second part will look at some stratagems that just need a little bit of balance tweaks to its numbers to have a competitive purpose and be worthy of our slot in our loadouts. Alright then, hold on to your hell pods and let's get it on. Starting with the Orbital Smoke Strike. This stratagem is majorly outclassed by the Eagle Smoke Strike in every which way. The only situation where the Orbital does better than the Eagle is if there are structures in the way that might block the Eagle's projectiles from landing where you want it to. That's it. The Orbital Smoke's paper stats are also pretty sad in comparison. The only upside the Orbital Smoke has is its lower cooldown of 90 seconds compared to the Eagle's rearming time of 120 seconds. 30 seconds faster against the Eagle's flexibility of carrying 2 charges probably isn't an even trade in my opinion, especially when you consider the Eagle fires 9 smoke missiles against the Orbital's 5. What's more, the Eagle always deploys its smoke in a straight line, acting as a horizontal curtain to break line of sight. Effectiveness of smoke aside, at the very least, it is consistent in what it does. The Orbital Smoke, on the other hand, deploys its payload somewhat randomly around the stratagem beacon, sometimes creating gaps where you can be detected, and sometimes barely creating adequate coverage. Given that the mission timer places a hard limit on how often you can deploy your stratagems, if you were to toss out smokes at every given opportunity, you could deploy around 35 Eagle smokes compared to the 25 Orbital Smokes in 40 minutes. So, given everything we've just covered, the Orbital Smoke Strike has less overall uptime, less coverage, and is less consistent than the Eagle. This stratagem really needs a lot of love, and hopefully, my proposal does just that. Once again, setting the effectiveness of smoke as a mechanic aside, I think the Orbital Smoke needs not just a buff to its stats, but also a more concrete purpose that sets it apart from the Eagle. If the Eagle is designed to create a curtain of smoke, acting as a directional wall of sorts, then I think the Orbital should shroud an area in smoke, creating a bastion of mist that encircles a large area that keeps you out of enemy detection for longer. Paper stat wise, these are the changes I would make. I've increased the number of smoke projectiles deployed from the Orbital Strike from 5 to 16. I think it's reasonable to say that our Super Destroyer can drop bigger payloads than the Eagle can, and 16 projectiles should be sufficient to keep the 30-meter area hidden from detection without any gaps. I've also doubled the duration of the smoke to 50 seconds, allowing you to stay hidden from patrols that will inevitably wander into a primary or side objective while you are trying to complete it. 50 seconds also buys you time during extraction, allowing you to stay hidden and away since enemies are drawn towards the center. If you are going to be killed during extraction, tossing out an Orbital Smoke creates a safe zone where you can land without immediately respawning into danger upon exiting the Hellpod. Having the smoke zone close to the extraction site allows you to remain safely nearby to keep the countdown timer going even if you don't have much hard cover to work with. In exchange, the base cooldown for the Orbital Smoke is increased to 150 seconds to balance out its much higher duration, but to also emphasize the Eagle Smoke's advantage of higher uptime. While I don't expect the Orbital Smoke to break into the top 5 most popular stratagems with this change, I hope now its purpose is a lot more clearer. Next, we have the Patriot Exosuit. Ever since the fix to the Exosuit's rockets, I don't think I've ever seen it in my games. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen an exosuit being used seriously in the higher difficulties, and for good reason. The fact of the matter is, the exosuit doesn't bring enough value into a mission given its constraints and firepower. Even if its rocket aim was fixed, I doubt it would be worth bringing over other combat stratagems. Personally, I think the exosuit in its current state doesn't live up to the power fantasy that a mech should bring. This is largely due to having inadequate firepower to match the increasingly dense and armor-heavy mix of enemies in the higher difficulties. As the exosuit already has the constraints of a summon limit of 2 and a cooldown of 10 minutes, I think bringing up its firepower will increase its value as a stratagem that can last for longer periods of battle. To accomplish this, I've increased its rocket damage from 400 to 600, allowing you to more reliably two-shot Bile Titans. The max rockets are limited to 14 rounds as it is, so making it more lethal and more consistent helps deliver better value. I've also gone and doubled its machine gun ammo, giving you 2000 rounds to work with, which should offer you more combat uptime with the mech. 2000 rounds is the equivalent of 13 MG43 magazines, giving you an incredible amount of sustained firepower against bug breachers and bot battalions. With these changes, even if you run out of rockets, your mech is at least an armored MG43 platform that can deal with the majority of enemies in a mission for a while longer. 1000 rounds goes by way too quickly against the kind of density you're facing from difficulty 7 and up. Although not mentioned in the table, I also feel the mech should have its durability increased as well, at least strong enough to tank some ranged attacks from Devastators without immediately being critically damaged in an instant. Next, we have everyone's favourite, Landmines. Personally, I love using landmines, much to the dismay of my teammates sometimes.
I've got this one.
And sometimes myself as well.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
That being said, I love them because they offer a lot of tactical utility, especially against bugs. However, I don't think it deals enough damage for something that's supposed to be a major obstacle to cross. I feel that any enemy that isn't an outright heavy unit should suffer substantial limb damage and die outright. But because of how limb health works in this game, some enemies can step on multiple mines before succumbing to them. Buffing its blast damage should make it more devastating, allowing the majority of enemies to at most take 2 mines to bring down. Now, you might be wondering why I've gone through the trouble of increasing the health of the mine deployment tower. The reason is simple. It's actually a key part of the stratagem's function and not just meant to toss out the mines. If you've played with any of the emplacements or sentries, you'll know that enemies love to target them, even choosing them over Helldivers in some circumstances. Because the deployment tower scatters mines around itself, the tower acts as a lure to draw enemies towards it and through the mines it has just dispersed. While not really relevant against bots, against the Terminids, it's like luring bugs to a light. For this reason, increasing the health of the tower allows it to draw more bugs through the minefield for longer, increasing the effectiveness of the stratagems against swarms as an offensive weapon, but also as a crowd control tool as well. A reduction in its cooldown allows for more usage opportunities for shutting down bug breaches, thinning out patrols, or covering a choke point, as well as causing your teammates more grief. Just tell them to mind their footing when you've deployed it. Next, we have probably one of the worst performing stratagems in the game, the Guard Dog Backpack. I could dedicate an entire video talking about the problems plaguing the Guard Dog given its position in the game and in the context of our current arsenal. But what you really need to know is the Guard Dog is actually worse than our Liberator Assault Rifle, despite supposedly using the same weapon. While it does have the same 60 damage as the AR-23 Liberator, it only has a miserable 30 rounds. Do you want to know how fast 30 rounds goes by? Here. Set aside the fact that it was shooting the Fabricator and wasting ammo, even against pleb enemies, the uptime of the Guard Dog is so low that you'll actually run dry within a couple of minutes of active combat. The table I'm showing you has a bunch of considerations on how to improve it, but honestly, there's nothing I could tweak stat-wise that would give it a clear purpose that isn't already being fulfilled by the Guard Dog Rover. You know, the laser one that has infinite ammo and a significantly higher uptime. So for this reason, I propose a total rework of the Guard Dog to give it a more defined purpose that lives up to its name. I propose changing the Guard Dog into the Guard Dog Punisher, a close-range defensive Guard Dog that is designed to keep enemies away if they get too close to you, like stalkers and hunters. This version of the Guard Dog will be equipped with the Punisher shotgun that has an active combat radius of 12 meters. Should an enemy come closer than 12 meters, the guard dog will blast it with its modified Punisher shotgun, dealing high damage and, more importantly, high stagger to stun enemies momentarily and knock them back. Like the current guard dog, once it runs out of shells, it needs to return to the backpack to be rearmed. More ammo can be picked up from resupply bricks and random ammo drops. It is a drastic change from what we currently have now, but I think this distinct role of being a close-range protector gives it a solid purpose that would pair well with primary and support weapons that need space to fight or have low handling. Next up, we've got the Rocket Sentry. I actually like using the Rocket Sentry against bugs. There's something pleasing about the Sentry winding up and firing rockets from afar. However, its paper stats and in-game performance is much to be desired. The Rocket Sentry does alright damage. With 200 impact damage, it deals about a third of the impact of an expendable anti-tank, but also has one tier lower penetration as well. Including its 150 blast damage, I think it's alright given the size of rockets fired. Where I'd like to improve the Rocket Sentry is its salvo size of 2 to 4, and its max target range from 75 meters to 100 meters. The idea behind these changes is to basically give us our own rocket devastator, allowing us to launch a barrage of rockets that will decimate an enemy or a small group. Time to give those bots a taste of their own damn medicine. I've also increased its projectile speed and blast radius to make dealing damage to fast-moving bugs like hunters and even gunships more consistent and more effective given its increased engagement distance. The cherry on top is having its ammo capacity increased for better damage potential given its higher salvo size. These changes should make the Rocket Sentry a formidable weapon on the battlefield where good positioning and preemptive planning is greatly rewarded. Next on the list is the Tesla Tower. In its current state, the Tesla Tower is a fairly inconsistent performing emplacement that needs to be placed in harm's way in order for it to deal damage. And while it does do pretty decent damage, more often than not, it dies pretty fast before you can make the most of its presence. So, my balance changes slightly bumps up its health to an even 1000, but more importantly, increases its armor value from light 1 to light 2, making it much more resistant to being swarmed by small bugs and light range fire. The increase to its arc count further leans into the Tesla Tower's intended purpose of being an ad-clearing obstacle. Summoning it near a breach should prove to be an effective tactic for thinning out enemy numbers as they emerge. Beyond these changes, the Tesla Tower, like the Arc Thrower, needs to be more consistent in its targeting to really be viable. Right now, it's electrocuting all sorts of things that aren't enemies in its vicinity, wasting a lot of its damage potential as an emplacement stratagem. Alright, those were all the non-support weapon stratagems that I believe could use some tuning to bring them into relevance within the current sandbox. Next, we have the stratagems that I think could use some small number tweaks to bring its effectiveness into a more competitive space, as well as better solidifying its purpose in our arsenal. First in this section is the Eagle Strafing Run. I've been using this stratagem a lot more often in my recent games, largely because I'm tired of using the usual stuff. Personally, I think this stratagem is underrated in that you actually do quite a bit given how it works. When deployed, the Eagle Strafing Run fires a barrage of gunfire in a 60-meter straight line in the direction the stratagem was deployed. The table you see now shows you the damage profile of the Eagle Strafing Run, which also happens to be the same as the Orbital Gatling Strike. When you look at its stats, it's actually pretty decent as an offensive tool. It has more than enough damage to wipe out peasant enemies, but also has the armor penetration to deal some respectable damage to tougher ones, like Bile Spewers and Devastators. I've opted to increase the impact damage of the shots by 25%, making direct hits on medium armored enemies more damaging. This is largely to improve the Strafing Run as an effective tool against swarms of Spewers and battalions of Devastators that are lining up while chasing you or blasting you down. For some reason, despite being less impactful in terms of damage when compared against the Eagle Cluster Bomb, the Strafing Run has less charges available. Many times I have read the argument that you might as well bring the cluster bombs since it not only does more damage over a larger area and has higher penetration, but also has more charges to spend. Therefore, I have increased the Strafing Run charges to 7, 2 more than a fully upgraded cluster bomb stratagem to give it a stronger identity as a very flexible combat support tool that has a very high uptime. The idea here is to use the Strafing Run as if it were a core part of your primary weapon loadout, but against groups of non-heavy armored enemies to wipe them out or to soften them up. Next, we have the Eagle 500 Kilo Bomb. The eternal topic of conversation around this stratagem is that its blast radius is painfully small, and for something that's supposed to be so devastating, it doesn't wipe out very many enemies at all. For reference, the 500 Kilo has a lethal to Helldiver blast radius of 20 meters. If you are on flat ground and less than 20 meters to the explosion, there's a very good chance you are going to die. The explosion portion of the 500 kilo deals 1400 damage at the center of its blast. This is more than enough damage to bring Bile Titans and Chargers down no problem. The problem, and this is speculation based on my observations, is that outside of what appears to be a 3 or 4 meter radius, the 500 kilo suffers a massive fall off in damage that scales down extremely quickly. Here's an illustration of how steep that drop might look like. There's also a thought that the damage cone of the 500 kilo points upwards rather than downwards, allowing it to better hit things above it like Bile Titan faces than below it. And if we overlay the two thoughts together, we get a familiar looking shape. Its rather narrow cone of attack and steep damage fall off is the reason why you need to treat the 500 kilo like an orbital precision strike and land it right under or in front of the head of a Bile Titan or Charger to kill it. If indeed this is how the current 500 kilo is operating, then I would hope smoothing its damage fall off to something that looks more like this would make it feel more consistent and impactful with regards on how devastating it's supposed to be. Not exactly a very grand change, but one that would make it feel much nicer. Moving on, we have the Orbital Precision Strike. I love this stratagem a lot. Not only does it sound cool, it hits very hard, it is very consistent in its damage output, and is an overall very flexible tool for dealing with structures and armor. However, the Precision Strike suffers from the same thing the Smoke Strike does as well. The Eagle version, in this case the 500 kilo, can do what it does but better. The following table is the stat profile for the Precision Strike compared to the Eagle 500 kilo. As you can see, in all accounts except for impact penetration, the 500 kilo outdoes the Precision Strike. That being said, I don't think boosting up the lethality of the Precision Strike is going to make it competitive against the 500 kilo, not without introducing way too much power creep that would also diminish the value of the 500 kilo as well. Instead, I'd like to see the cooldown of the Precision Strike improved greatly, leaning into its flexibility with better uptime. Question is, how much? If we applied the same theoretical potential of the two stratagems over the course of a mission, tossing one out as soon as you could, you would end up with the same use numbers as the Smoke Strike versus Eagle Smoke, about 35 500 kilos and 25 precision strikes over the course of a 40-minute mission. My balanced proposal would be to simply allow the Precision Strike to be used as many times as the 500 kilo. So, if we wanted to throw up to 35 precision strikes over the course of a 40-minute mission, the Precision Strike cooldown would need to be around 68.5 seconds, which represents a 24% reduction in cooldown. But what I'm going to do is cheat a little and lower it to 67.5 seconds, shaving just 0.8 seconds more. Why? Because 67.5 seconds is the same cooldown shared by the Orbital Gas Strike and the Orbital EMS Strike, with the stratagem upgrade that reduces cooldowns by 10%. Meaning, at base, the Precision, Gas and EMS would now have the same 75-second base cooldown, forming the orbital trifecta of single target damage, AoE ad clear, and crowd control. This change accentuates the Precision Strike's purpose as a jack-of-all-trades tool that is useful all the time, whereas the Eagle 500 kilo stands out in its burst damage to bring down Bile Titans with ease, and the rapid back-to-back cooldown if you are dealing with multiple heavy units at the same time. Finally, the last item of my balance list is the MG43 Machine Gun Sentry. Often compared against the Gatling Sentry, the Machine Gun Sentry is seen as an inferior version of it. It deals the same damage and has the same armor penetration as the Gatling, but fires 2.5 times slower and only has 1/3 the amount of ammo capacity. In a drawn-out engagement where both sentries have to keep firing, the Gatling Sentry will outlast the machine gun easily. What's more, both sentries have the same cooldown despite such an obvious difference in power. The only advantage the Machine Gun Sentry has is its faster turning speed, allowing it to better retarget enemies without wasting too much ammo as it turns. So what's my balance change to the Machine Gun Sentry? Well, similarly to the Precision Strike versus 500 kilo, I think pushing up the Machine Gun Sentry's damage stats would just diminish the value of the Gatling and doesn't solve the problem of the Machine Gun Sentry's lack of purpose. Instead, I propose we re-establish what the Machine Gun Sentry should be used for. If the Gatling Sentry is best at engaging large number of enemies from a relatively static location and doesn't need to turn much, then the Machine Gun Sentry should be used to support a more mobile playstyle with better targeting capabilities. I have attempted to accomplish this in two ways via tweaking its stats. First is to reduce its cooldown significantly, dropping it from 180 seconds to 115 seconds, which represents a 36% reduction. This increased uptime allows you to deploy the Machine Gun Sentry frequently to provide supporting fire. Think of it as a deployable Helldiver that comes in to help you with little more than a single clip of the MG43 machine gun. With its lower cooldown, you can more frequently summon the Machine Gun Sentry as a defensive tool to cover you from an angle that you aren't facing, or use it to provide flanking fire against a patrol or support your siege over a point of interest or side objective. As the Machine Gun Sentry doesn't have that much firepower, buffing its survivability gives it a better chance of lasting long enough to make the most of its shots, even allowing you to play a little more aggressively with it on the front lines against range attacks. This creates a wider contrast between it and the Gatling Sentry, which is squishier and is more of a glass cannon stratagem that works best with proper positioning and placement. Alright, that concludes this video with all the balance changes I like to see made to many of our underperforming or unloved stratagems. The changes to the Orbital Precision Strike and the Machine Gun Sentry also have the indirect benefit of making the new diver experience more fun, as these two are the starting stratagems they have access to. Lower cooldowns on both of them means not only can they use their stratagems more often to kill things, which is enjoyable, but they can get in more practice over the course of a game to get better with their placements and positioning too. The reason why I think it's important that Arrowhead revisits many of these stratagems is because it's an untapped source of enjoyment for players. As I mentioned earlier, by fixing the damage over time bug, we could have more fun with the tools we already had, giving us more space to play with new toys and mixing up our games. I think one of the most painful things for a game to go through is when the studio and its devs spend long nights and pour their sweat and tears into bringing an idea to life, only for poor balancing to kill it right out the gate. All that effort wasted because it didn't add any enjoyment or excitement to players, and worse still, caused players to feel dissatisfied. I hope with this video that someone on Arrowhead's side is taking a look at our underused stratagems and are planning to do something about them to make them more fun to play with. Let me know what you think about the ideas here and how else you might bring some change to our underused stratagems to make them more exciting. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Over and out, Helldivers.